Hello and welcome to an introduction to Adobe Photoshop. I'm David Taylor, a professional landscape photographer based in Northumberland. Adobe Photoshop is an app that can be used to edit photos or create original pieces of art or design. There are several versions of Photoshop. Photoshop Elements is the consumer version, but today I'm going to be using the full version. The two are slightly different, but I'll be using tools common to both, so don't worry if your version of Photoshop doesn't look like mine. There are also alternatives to Photoshop, such as Affinity Designer, but what's covered today should still be relevant. Now, let's take a closer look at Photoshop. Here we are in Photoshop. Today we'll be concentrating on the toolbar, which is this vertical strip on the left here, and the toolbar options, which runs horizontally along the top below the menu. First though, how to create a new document. Go to File, New. Name the file here at this point if you like. You can also set the pixel size, say 2500 by 2000, or set the file size in inches, centimeters or millimeters, points, picas or columns. It depends on the kind of graphic you're doing, but generally you would set it to pixels unless you knew exactly how big you wanted to print your finished image out at, in which case choose centimeters or inches depending on preference. In this case I'll leave it set to pixels, and we'll start with a white background. Click OK. And that then creates your document for you. When you're editing a picture, and we'll just draw something very quickly. If you want to undo what you've just done, go to Edit, Undo, or if you want to redo it, go to Edit, Redo. You can also use Control or Command Z, or Shift Control Z, or Shift Command Z. You'll notice that I've got a red brush at the moment. To change the colour of brushes and other tools that use colour, click on the colour picker here, which brings up this little box. You can choose from your range of colours here, from this vertical bar, by moving it up and down, so it cycles through the various colours of the spectrum. You can also choose how bright a colour is by moving upwards, or how dark it is by moving downwards, or how intense the colour is by moving to the right, or how grey it is by moving to the left. You can also, and I've just opened up a new image here, a much more colourful image, pick colours from an image by clicking on the colour picker, and then just clicking anywhere within the image to set that as the new foreground colour. And it's the foreground colour that you would paint with. The background colour, which is just below, is more relevant when you use the eraser tool, but we'll get into that in more detail later. You can also very quickly swap between the two colours, between the foreground and the background colour, just by clicking on this little arrow here. And now, let's take a closer look at some of the toolbar options. When you first open an image, you'll notice that there's a magnification value at the top of the image information bar here. At the moment this image has been displayed at 50%, so I'm not seeing it at its full size. If I click on the magnification icon there, and have zoom in selected, I can zoom in and increase the magnification value. To zoom out, I can either click up here, select the zoom out icon, and click to zoom out again. Or, with zoom in selected, if I hold down the Alt key as I click, it will temporarily change magnification to zoom out. I can also click on here to select 100% magnification, or I can also double click on the magnification icon to do the same thing. If I select the hand icon though, it will automatically set the image so it fits into the screen. You can also right click to get some of these options up on a little sub-menu, or I can use scrubby zoom. If I select that, now rather than having to click individually each time I want to zoom in or zoom out, I can just hold down the left mouse button and zoom in, or by holding Alt, zoom out nice and smoothly. So magnification is really good for checking things like focusing, to see whether your image is properly focused or not, but also to see any sort of details that you've changed or edited and sort of check that they're exactly how you want them. The first tools we'll look at are the selection tools. This includes the marquee, the lasso, and the move tool. Let's start with the marquee first. The marquee allows you to draw a box, like so, and this has defined an area of the screen that you can either then copy, which you can do from the Edit menu. This can then be pasted into a new document. If we go to File, New, it will automatically create an image of the right size for you. And then Paste. It'll paste the selection from the previous shot into this new image. But we'll close that for the moment so we don't save that. So marquee can be used to copy and then paste areas of an image from one image to another. It can also be used to protect an area. So in this case, with the marquee selected, if I were to select the paintbrush, and we'll come back to the paintbrush in a few moments, but for the moment we'll just use it, and you see as I paint into this area, anything outside the marquee is protected, so I can only paint within the selected area. I'll just undo that. You can invert the selection. If you go to Select, Inverse, and this turns the selection inside out, so now when I paint, it only paints outside the area. If you want to delete the selection, you just click outside the area and it clears the selection. If you want to add to a selection, so in this case we've drawn a small area, if you click on this option here and then draw again, it will add to your selected area. If you want to subtract, you select that option. Normally the selection is fairly free, so you can draw any rectangular shape. If you want to constrain it to a square, just hold down the Shift key as you drag. You can also, by clicking on the Style menu, select Fixed Ratio. This then lets you select the ratio of one side of the selection to the other. So if I was to say 2:1, the width is now 2 for every 1 height, which will always produce a rectangle like that. Or you can select a fixed size and set the pixel size. So if I set it to 500 by 500, that produces a 500 pixel square, like so. Normally when you create a selection, the edge is hard. However, if I was to set the feather to a high value, say 50, draw selection, you'll see it's not quite so sharp now. The corners are rounded. When I copy, create a new document, and then paste, it's created a very soft feathered edge around the area that I've pasted into this new document. That's the rectangular selection. You also have circles, so you can create a circular. And again, holding down Shift constrains it to a circle. And you also have single pixel selection, where it just selects a row of pixels, either vertically or horizontally. The Move tool lets you move your selection around. So when you move that, it actually pulls it out of the image, and the selection can then be moved around into a new area. The lasso is a freehand version of the selection, so you can just generally draw freehand. So you can create interesting shapes, like so. And again, if you set feather to a value and draw, it'll be a much smoother selection. Rather than going up to the edit menu, this time I'm going to use shortcut keys. I'm going to press Control or Command C to copy my selection, Control or Command N for my new document, and then Control or Command V to paste into this new document. And you can see it's a very soft feathered edge again. And then finally, we have the polygonal lasso tool and the magnetic lasso tool. The polygonal lasso tool lets you draw by clicking. It's not quite so freehand. Every click I make creates a new corner. And then when I get back to the start point, it creates the selection. The magnetic lasso tool tries to find edges, so it'll, as you hold the mouse button down, it'll search for edges around your subject. So it's finding the edges of this little bubble here. Sometimes it's not that accurate, but generally it does a pretty reasonable job. And again, I can copy, create a new file, paste it in, or even if I select the Move tool, and this time I'm going to hold down Alt, and rather than cutting out from the picture, it's left the original graphic behind, but allowed me to then move a copy essentially of the selection around. Again, if I want to paste that down, I would just click, and there you go. I use the selection tools a lot, partly to protect areas of the picture that I don't want to be altered, but also to create new documents by copying and pasting. Now we come to the brush, pencil and eraser tool. Both the brush and pencil tool are found here. The eraser tool just here. The brush first. The brush essentially allows you to paint within your image. You can change the size of the brush from here. Or by pressing the square bracket buttons. The left square bracket shrinks the brush. The right square bracket increases the size. You can change the softness or hardness of the brush either by selecting the relevant brush or by moving the hardness slider between 100% and 0%. So at 0%, the brush is very soft and almost like an airbrush. At 100%, the brush is very hard-edged. There are a variety of brushes to choose from, which all have different effects. But generally, for most purposes, you'd probably use one of the circular brushes here. You can change both the opacity and the flow of the brush. If you set opacity to a low figure, it will always just paint to a fraction of the set colour value. So in this case it's black, but because opacity is at 10%, it's only painting as a very light grey. It's only when I brush several times that the colour starts to build up again. Flow, on the other hand, works a bit like an airbrush, where if I set it to a low value, initially it starts off light grey, but as I keep my finger on the mouse button, it gradually builds up until it reaches the black, which is the current colour value. You can also use the symmetry tool, which essentially copies what you're brushing in a symmetrical fashion. So in this case I've got a vertical symmetry, so if I was to brush on one side, it'll mirror that pattern on the other. But you can also have more complex symmetry. Such as wavy. And this can be resized as necessary. So now as I brush, and I'll pick a different colour. It's a more complex, symmetrical paint. To turn symmetry off, just go to Symmetry Off at the top here. The pencil tool is essentially the same, but this time zoom in. It has a very jagged edge in the way that the paintbrush, even when it's set to hard, still has a slightly soft edge. But again, you can change options like opacity as well as symmetry. The erase tool does exactly what you expect. It allows you to erase your brush marks, but it takes its cue from the background colour this time. So if you want to erase to white, in this case, which is the background colour of the graphic, I'd have to set the background colour to white. But you could use the erase tool as essentially another brush by setting it to blue, say. So you could swap between your paintbrush and the erase tool and essentially have two different colours to paint with. And now we come to the Dodge, Burn and Sponge tools. Dodge allows you to lighten areas of a picture, and it works in a similar way to the brush, where you've got a circular shape which you can then brush around on the image, and there are three basic controls: highlights, midtones and shadows. Select highlights, and only the highlights are affected when you brush. So if I brush in this light area here, you see it very, very quickly gets brighter. We'll just undo that. I can also change the exposure, so at 100% it gets applied very quickly. At At 10%, say, it gets applied much more slowly, so it takes longer for the effect to take place. But you can see the highlights are still burning out. Now if I select midtones, the highlights will be protected, so the highlights won't get affected, and only the mid area, so you can see again, it's not burning out that quickly. I'll just increase exposure a little bit. It's only really the midtones that are now being affected. So again, undo that. Pick shadows, and now it's only the darkest areas of the picture that are affected. So if I brush into here, you see it's bringing up any details within the shadow, but the highlights aren't really being affected at all. Restore that. The burn tool is the exact opposite. It darkens area of a picture. And again, we've got these three controls. So if I want to darken the highlights only, I would select highlights. And then when I brush, you can see how it darkens those highlights very, very quickly. Pick the shadows, and only the shadows get affected. So again, the highlights are protected, but the shadows get darker very, very quickly. Finally, sponge allows you to make colours less vivid or more vivid. If we select desaturate first, and increase the size of the brush, I'll make the a bit stronger. So you can see as I'm brushing, the colours start to look less vivid and more grey, so they head more towards a very flat grey look. But if I pick saturate, I'll just undo that. Saturate makes the colours more vivid, so the colours become more intense and more colourful. So again, if I brush here, you can see they're getting very vibrant. So these three tools are great for adjusting photos. It allows you to bring out more detail in the highlights with the dodge tool, bring out the detail in the shadows with the burn tool, but also to either reduce the intensity of colours or to bring colours out with the sponge tool. So now we come to the final tool today, which is the paint bucket. This is normally hidden underneath the gradient tool, so you first need to select that from the pop-up menu. Use paint bucket to fill in areas with colour. You can either do this by making a selection or just directly into the image itself. You can also choose to fill a pattern, and there are numerous patterns available by default. And it always fills to a boundary, so in this case it filled to the boundary of the red. You can change the opacity, which by default is at 100%, so when I click to fill, it fills at 100% of the colour value. Just undo that. Whereas if I set it to 50%, say, it's only 50% of the value, so it's a much paler fill. If I set it to 10%, it's very, very pale, so it's just filling in 10% of the yellow colour value that we picked before. Tolerance determines how far colour spread based on how similar other colours in the picture are. So with a low tolerance, and I want to fill in this yellow area, with a low tolerance, the purple doesn't spread that far. It only really spreads amongst the yellows that are similar to where I clicked. Just undo that. Increase tolerance though, and now when I fill, it spreads further because it looks for colours which are slightly less similar to where I clicked initially. A higher tolerance still, it spreads almost across the entire image because it's taking in a lot more colours. If we go back to 30, say, which is a mid-range tolerance, when contiguous is selected, fill will only fill colours that are next to each other. If I untick it and fill, it will look for yellows both where I click and which aren't connected in any way. So if I click now to fill, it's found the yellow here, but also some yellows down here and up here as well. Increase the tolerance a bit. It increasingly finds other colours within the picture that it can fill. And that's the fill tool, which is a fairly straightforward tool compared to something like brush, for instance. I hope you've enjoyed finding out about Photoshop. I've only covered a small number of the tools available. There are many more to try. The key is not to be afraid to experiment, for Photoshop is a great tool for creative play. I hope you have fun using it.